Want to earn some quick cash? Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston is stocking up on cute and cozy fall styles. We pay you on the spot for your gently used name brand clothes and accessories. Plus, while you're here, you can stock up on must-have looks for autumn. We're the go-to sustainable shopping spot for teens and young adults. So stop by Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston today and refresh your wardrobe. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Fall's here, and so are incredible sales at Tanger Outlets. Find must-have handbags, footwear, and all the latest fall arrivals, all at unbeatable savings. Shop top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, Gap Outlet, Coach, and even more brands you love. Save more every time you shop with deals up to 70% off. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at tanger.com.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 27 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Ash.
And I'm Tilly.
So today, Tilly, our quest is quite a fraught one.
Oh no, I don't like the sound of that.
Neither do I, but unfortunately the balance of the realms is in our hands today. I know.
No pressure.
I know, right? I received a parchment from the wizards again.
Not those fireball geezers. What do they want now?
They want us to find the chosen one.
Sorry, the chosen one? Wait, you mean like the secret heir, the one who will restore balance to the world?
Exactly that one, yeah.
Well, sounds easy. Shall we get lunch on the way?
Wait, hang on. Wait, you don't sound particularly worried about this.
Why would I? Come on, it's hardly going to be difficult. There's at least one new chosen one every other month around here. All we need to do is go out, spot the big, brooding, reluctant hero who happens to be carrying around a great gleaming sword or something. We'll start at the Prancing Pony Inn, grab some lunch, bish bash bosh, we found a chosen one. Did the mages say anything about what they looked like?
I don't think we'll find them in a pub, Tilly. They're apparently a child.
Oh, right. Well, okay. All right, so how do we go about finding this chosen one kid?
Well, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
How do we usually recognise children in the archaeological record?
Oh, gosh. Or not even the archaeological record. How do you even recognise children in the fantastical record? Because they're also not that common, really.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Telly. So what fantasy books have you read that feature the concept of the chosen one, but particularly a child as a chosen one?
Well, I mean, I guess, to be honest, the first one that springs to mind is, of course, Harry Potter, because he is called the chosen one, and he is a baby when he's chosen. But then the whole point is that it's like, as he grows up, he then sort of, well, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read it, it's as he grows up that he decides whether or not he becomes the chosen one. So actually he didn't need to have been the chosen one, it turns out, all along, which I thought was quite hilarious. But anyway.
It also, that subverts the trope of the chosen one, because usually they don't have a choice.
Yes.
Like they are that and that is it.
Yeah.
That's their destiny.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is somewhat disappointing.
I'm trying to think what other, I don't think I actually read that many books where it's the chosen one. Usually the ones that I read have more of a kind of reluctant hero one, but they're not the chosen one necessarily. Although, oh no, but that one's not about a child. I was thinking of, I think I mentioned it in a previous episode, that radio show, which I've forgotten the name of again, where it's the chosen one and it turns out to be the main character's dog. And they get transported to this fantasy universe and then the dog becomes a person. And that's the one, I mentioned it in the Dark Lord episode, because there's a Dark Lord in there who's hilarious and he's played by someone famous who's really good at comedic timing and everything. And anyway, sorry, but not a child. And the whole point is we're trying to do child.
Well, no, I mean, that kind of is where it develops, I think. So like often the chosen one narrative happens from birth up until adulthood. Like it follows their whole life. So they'll have like, you know, a really underrated birth. They're probably an orphan or some kind of thing like that.
Yes, true.
And then they're probably an apprentice of some kind, or working in some sort of job that they don't like.
Servant, or
something. Farm boy.
Yeah,
I was thinking.
I've reread Princess Bride recently.
Yeah. As you wish. And things like that. And then someone meets them. And then it's usually a wizard or like someone who is
some gnarly old figure who's
wise and understands this myth or whatever, or has hidden them. A lot of the times that's the case. So you've got like Obi-Wan Kenobi,
like Star Wars, exactly.
Hagrid, Dumbledore, So someone's hidden them, and they're the hidden heir, and usually the heir to something either amazing or something terrible.
Yes,
that's the thing. So I was thinking of Percy Jackson and the Olympians.
Oh, of course, yeah, that's a good one.
Because he's the son of Poseidon. He's hidden. He doesn't know until he, reaches a certain point where he is no longer really considered a child. And that's really interesting because that's the concept that we're going to kind of focus in a little bit on today. Is what is a child, essentially.
True. Because actually, like how do you even... Because, even sticking with fantasy books, I'm just thinking of like young adult fiction and things. And most of the time in those books, the characters are who I would now, as a, 30s, someone in my 30s would just be like, that is a child. But at the time when I was reading them, I was like, yes, this character understands me. I'm an adult and I can go out and do my own thing. And you're like, darling, you're 15 years old. You are not.
Daddy, I love him. No, you don't. You're 16, Ariel. Shut up.
Exactly. King Triton knew what he was on about.
He knew.
You knew that side of
you
things.
won't love him in like 5 years' time.
Trust me. You're going to go through all this faff. He's going to make you cut your legs off.
I know. Sacrifices, man. No way.
But then it's like, so indeed, even the concept of what an adult is in fantasy fiction is already, it's so dependent on the perception of the person reading it as well.
Yeah, and a lot of fantasy fiction is also set in a medieval-esque world. So usually you have these kind of regimented when you become a man or when you become a woman or when you become a adult, in the story and the trope. And it's usually some sort of acceptance of oneself or reaching a certain age. Usually obviously it diverts a bit from the child chosen one, who is like around about, 8, 11 usually.
Yeah,
but like
true.
when they're when you go into a young adult fantasy fiction, it's often they're hitting the ages of 16 or they're coming up to 16 or they're coming up to 18, which is usually our modern perception of when someone becomes an adult, then put back into a medieval setting.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Which then, is not. Although that's like all of the ones about Romeo and Juliet and things, right? As well. I mean, I know that that's not fantasy really, but like
she's
basically all these historic novels and everything, and you're like, actually she would have been 13, and it's like,
hang on, no, but that's the thing. So we sort of have to detach what adulthood is to us and what is childhood, and we need to look at that in order to find this chosen one. So other books, just notable books quickly, we've said Harry Potter, we've said Percy Jackson, The Northern Lights is Dark Materials.
I guess, true, I never really thought of that, but I guess she is the chosen one, isn't she?
Yes, by Phillip Pullman, right? She's the chosen one in a way, but she sort of takes on that role too. Usually that's the acceptance part of it. You get the Shannara Chronicles by Terry Brooks.
I haven't read that one. I need to read them.
They did a TV show. It was terrible. Also, I thought this was good because it's by Suzanne Collins, who did The Hunger Games, which is your reluctant hero but chosen one, which is Katniss Everdeen.
Right.
But Gregor, the Overlander. Have you ever read the kids' books?
It sounds like a comedy book.
It kind of is, yeah. Okay. There's some fun elements to it, but it's a young children's book.
Yeah.
And basically, he finds this subterranean portal world essentially, and he's the chosen one from that because he is from above land.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So there's a lot of different concepts that you can kind of look at, and how do you think it's developed over time in fantasy?
Well, I guess. Well, yeah, we just said probably the kids have gotten older in that respect. I don't know really. It's sort of like what you were talking about before with the trope and everything of they always are orphan or they're always in some horrendous spot or anything. But I can imagine maybe in sort of earlier fantasy or early folklore, it was more about like, oh, this is the prestige. Like you're sort of chosen to be the chosen one actually from a much younger age. And it almost related to kind of, I guess, themes of royalty or nobility and that kind of thing in that respect. Like, that's the only thing I could really think.
Yeah, it's kind of like The Prince and the Pauper sort of thing. Or like even, I've just thought of a film like that, Man in the Iron Mask, and how these people are hidden away and then given power by some sort of force or something. Yeah. But you see the same tropes in adult fantasy as well. Usually it's the same sort of person. They're kind of an underdog. The biggest one I can always think of is Luke Skywalker. Basically, Star Wars is that medieval fantasy, and he is a child from the very beginning. Yet Leia, right there, also his twin, nothing.
Yeah, because she's a woman. Don't be ridiculous. A woman can't be a chosen one.
No, well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, it doesn't seem likely actually that they are the chosen one for some reason. And then so a lot of the kind. Well, we've said a few different books there. Most of them are boys.
I'm now trying to think of chosen ones. I mean, actually, in Terry Pratchett, you do have the Tiffany Aching series, but indeed, she's not necessarily the chosen one. She's more just the only one, really. It's sort of...
You're the last resort, I'm sorry.
Basically, it's sort of like, okay, you're the only one that's around, like, therefore... But then she is kind of the chosen one. It's sort of almost that trope, and that starts with her as a kid. That's what I'm sort of trying to think.
That's also kind of what Terry Pratchett does. He inverts the tropes, doesn't he? He makes them quite funny because you're like, well, you'll do.
All right, fine. You have to deal with this. Why? Because you're the only one here.
Yeah. And it could even be that in our modern sensibility, there's something about when boys become men and when girls become women.
Yes.
And so, like,
definitely.
You see that boys are sort of given adulthood earlier in books, potentially, like 12 years old, 13 years old. While girls, when they reach, I don't know, even though girls are technically, they're meant to, isn't that the idea that they always mature faster or whatever?
Yes.
Girls are seen as maybe more YA books. It's that point where they're reaching like 15, 16, 17, 18, that they're coming into their own. And I don't know why our modern sensibility sees that. Maybe I'm just generalizing.
No, but I might be, because you always sort of think, oh, little boys, they'll want to read more about, great adventures and all of that kind of thing when they're 12, 13 already. But of course, little girls wouldn't want to read about that. They'll be reading about horses and ponies and, that kind of thing. And they'll only be interested in that stuff when they're older. So maybe that's sort of...
Yeah, there's a gender bias with it, definitely, that does not fully reflect actual reality.
Yeah, exactly.
No, there's plenty of people that want to play around with swords. I mean, that's why most of us become archaeologists, I think. Because we want to.
But do that. And the whole thing of age and just how it is, I mean, also in history and in prehistory as well, right? It's that kind of assumption that they're a child when they're this age, and it's also that gender bias, which we've talked about in a previous episode, is also pretty big there. I think when you think like, oh no, but she was just a young girl, and it's like, well, she probably had 3 kids by then. Like, it's she wouldn't have thought herself as a young girl.
Society wouldn't have,
yeah. Whereas a young boy is like, oh, he's on his way to becoming a warrior, and it's like, well, how is that? How is that the same? Like, how is that fair? So yes.
So, well, it sort of seems that we're going to be trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, could be anywhere. Could be any age. Where on earth do we start?
Well, I'm going to check the Western archives. You put the tea on and we'll be right back.
Well, we got a minute. I'm going to buy that truck I've been wanting.
Wait, don't you need, like, weeks to shop for a car?
I don't. Carvana makes it super convenient to find exactly what I want.
Hold up. You're buying a car on your phone? Isn't that more of a laptop thing?
You can shop wherever you want.
I like to do my research, read reviews, compare models. Plus, Carvana has thousands of options. How'd you decide on that truck?
Because I like it.
Oh, that is a great reason.
Go to Carvana.com to sell your car the convenient way.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
Fall's here, and so are incredible sales at Tanger Outlets. Find must-have handbags, footwear, and all the latest fall arrivals, all at unbeatable savings. Shop top brands like Nike Factory Store, Crocs, Gap Outlet, Coach, and even more brands you love. Save more every time you shop with deals up to 70% off. Tanger Outlets, always on trend, always on sale. Plan your trip at Tanger.com.
People are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. The hiring process can be slow and overwhelming. Simplify hiring with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform. With over 350 million global monthly visitors according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. That's Indeed.com/PODKATZ12. Terms and conditions apply.
Right. Okay, Tilly. So I was thinking, we're archaeologists, right?
Pretty much the concept of this whole show, Ash.
Haha, hysterical. Rude. But Tilly, right? I don't think we're thinking like archaeologists. That's why it feels like such an insurmountable task to find the chosen one. So if we think of it like this, right? We know children existed, otherwise we wouldn't be here, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So think of it like 2 episodes ago, okay, when we were talking about gender and feminist archaeology. Mm-hmm. Think about how that's opened up representation for women in diverse groups. So think of it like this. We know children were a significant part of a human social group. They exist. We know that they lived, they contributed, and were active agents in that past. They had to be. So to ignore them means that we'd be cutting out a huge part of our interpretation of that past.
Yeah. So we're basically talking about the archaeology of childhood.
Yeah, exactly. And we use that concept to find the chosen one, just like we would in archaeology.
Okay, but what exactly does the archaeology of childhood cover, though? That also seems like quite a broad subject.
Yeah, it is quite broad. So the archaeology of childhood is pretty much the study of childhood, children, child rearing, and related topics.
Yes. Well, that does still seem like quite a broad topic.
Yeah, it is. It is like undeniably is. However, it's really important because, children aren't really included readily in social models like our fictions or even given credit in the archaeological record a lot of the time.
Yeah, true. It's always about like adults and society and blah, blah, blah.
And I can guarantee that if you start thinking about a certain society, you'll probably think of the adults rather than the children. They're sort of not really talked about or not really thought about, right?
Well, and it's funny, actually, you should say this. So I don't want to be one of those people who's like, I'm a mother, I've had children. But I must say, after I had kids, I suddenly started like noticing more things that you sort of, I guess I never really thought about before, because it's just not something that comes up like that you really think about. So like I remember, I was breastfeeding my kids, and that means that you have to have clothing that allows you to easily breastfeed, so you don't have to just like undress every time you want to feed your child. And if you look at like quite a few replicas of prehistoric clothing and things like that, they're always quite like not tight necessarily, but there's a lot of ones where you're like, and I was looking at it going, there's no way you'd be able to breastfeed in that, like, which is just sort of funny. Like, it's not something that I ever thought about before, but then once you have that experience, you're suddenly like, oh, that's something.
Yeah. I often think with the brooches, like Viking replica stuff, the brooches that pin, I think they'd be really easy because you can just flip down the like top of the apron.
They're basically the breastfeeding bras, which just have like a little clip on the thing.
Like you do have a shift underneath it. Yeah, you have a shift underneath it, but that's easily moved.
You can just move it to the side. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that obviously gender archaeology, feminist archaeology, and the archaeology of childhood look into, especially because there's a lot of things in the archaeological record that we don't really like, we can kind of discard a lot of the time. That's because of our own modern bias.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the archaeology of childhood, it highlights the evidence of children, essentially. So you're looking at nearly every category of archaeological data we have has children in it. We don't really look at it as in depth. So it's this realm of study that looks at things like skeletal remains, burials, landscapes, buildings, and even artifacts.
Yeah, true. You have a lot of, although what I also find is that you also have a lot of artifacts which are just labeled as like, oh, they must have been children's toys, which you're like, well, like it's both ways, right? That you have, they're almost seen as like, we're not going to study them in too much detail, but if we need them for something, we're just going to label it as that. It's almost like ritual.
It's kind of discarded and there's nothing else to it, but there's so much more to it. And we can talk about that a little bit later as well, because there's this idea of play and creation that goes on, especially in prehistory. So when we're thinking of like the chosen one, something that they would have maybe grown up with, what do they do? What is their, when are they working? When are they children? What activities are they doing right now? What age could they be? And then it relates to how we find them and how we find them in the landscape.
Which, if we know that they're probably going to be working in some kind of low-end job or something like that based on the trope, then we start with those kind of places, with those kind of tasks in that respect.
But the first thing to really think about is, well, the concept of childhood. Okay. Yes. So what is considered a child within the archaeological record?
I actually don't know. I have no idea what a child, would it be someone who's still dependent on an adult for survival? Like, no, but then that could also be an older person as well. Like
exactly. Right. Yeah. So childhood for us as archaeologists, we have to realize that childhood is variable.
Yeah.
So it changes when it begins, when it ends. Sometimes, I mean, when I was doing my dissertation, my undergrad dissertation was about Anglo-Saxon female burials, but especially deviant burials. And that was often, the women were often buried with a child. Now, it might not be their child. It could be somebody else's child. It could be their child. It could be often coffin births as well, things like that when they die when they're pregnant. Yeah. But how they relate to that burial was essentially showing you if they even considered the baby as a person, if that child had personhood. So it needs to be, so the idea of life and when it begins is a really risky topic.
Yes.
But archaeologically, we still don't know how people in the past in different societies recognize when childhood begins.
Because even if they're born and they're live and whatever, then maybe even then they're still not actually a person or
they're
not
still
actually
not a child.
Yeah.
They're like an infant that is not seen as its own person.
They're like
it's
a
maybe
flesh package of something.
Screaming meat.
Become a spirit, which as a mother I can say.
They are they're connected to you. There's often when you see neonatal or postnatal like kind of burials, they don't really have a lot of grave goods, or they'll have a particular grave good that might relate to their childhood stage. So there's amber beads and things like that, especially in Anglo-Saxon burials, which is really interesting. But then that means that, it's deeply variable. So in fantasy, you see the chosen one is often given quests, and that signals the end of childhood.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're not a child anymore.
Yeah, they're not a child anymore because they're being given, they're workable. You're fit to work. Off you go.
Just the way you were just saying give, and then you were talking about grave goods and stuff. Quite often they're also given something when they're born or when they're given away or when they're, when they are a child, when they are a baby, that then is like a way of identifying them,
Yeah.
data. So they might also have something on them as well that would be like a...
like a bracelet. There's often lots of different cultures that give children bracelets, and it's almost when they get chubby enough, the bracelet breaks, and then they're no longer in that state of an aspect of childhood.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a good book, if anyone hasn't read it, it's really good. It's called Rethinking the Little Ancestor. It's all about archaeology and infancy. It's by Archaeopress. I believe it's free access, certain chapters. So
we can have a look. If it is, we'll put it in the show notes. And then you can...
But I took a quote from them because I think this is quite a good one. So they say, rather, children's experiences are many, and they are likely to have been treated very differently in diverse social and material situations. Any category of age also needs to be analysed in relation to other social variables such as sex, class, and ethnicity.
Which makes sense. I mean, even, well, it's a bit what we were talking about before, right? Like, when you're a certain person, you think of something else. I mean, even if we think of, I'm just looking back to our last episode where we were talking about Pride and Prejudice and zombies. I was rereading Pride and Prejudice recently, and I'm currently rereading Persuasion, and they talk about how Anne Elliot is, has basically a spinster at, 26 or whatever it is. Whereas now we'd be like, that's your prime, like that's when you start doing it or whatever. So even just in the last however many 100 years, we've already changed our perception of age and how that depends on your social status and your situation and all of these kind of things.
Yeah, and I think even reflectively looking back on it, we think of spinster as a bad thing, but actually spinster just means you were able to spin and have your own business.
And which I love.
Yeah. Have your own business, spin, and you're independent.
Sounds
so
ideal.
very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then if we're looking at child burials, children, I've just given away the whole game there. Oh my gosh.
Child burials.
So how would you find a child in the archaeological record? Like, how would you go about it?
Well, the skeleton, I guess, is the sort of most obvious one, because usually they're, well, but even then, I guess you see how old they are biologically, but then you would still need to know a bit about the social background to determine whether or not that is actually a child, like in the eyes of the society kind of thing. But you could at least work out the age, like how old they were, by a skeletal analysis. So, which I have actually done recently. Because I had to redo it as part of my job. I had to learn a little bit again about osteoarchaeology. And so we have a lot of skeletons that we get to sort of get through in the company I work for. And we had to lay them all out, and I had to identify all the bones and stuff. But then also we had a couple of children, and then I had to try and work out, age and gender and all of this kind of thing. And what was funny actually was at the time, my own daughter was just getting all of her teeth. And so I was able to use my knowledge of that to be like, well, they have the same amount of teeth as my daughter now has, so they must be around too. And they were like, yeah, exactly. Well done. It's like, yes.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like teeth and the skull being fused,
how many bones fuse together
in
different ways and things. So
gender or sex is a very difficult thing to do in child burials.
Yes.
You cannot.
Can't do that.
Which is interesting, because then that also could reflect societally how people were viewed, but you don't know.
True. Well, I mean, even now, must say, my kids are they're both girls, and it's always like, oh, who's this little boy? And I'm there going, yeah.
Like children don't have genders.
They don't look like boys or girls when they're little.
No, they just look like babies. You baby.
Yeah, basically. You are a baby. You are not a person yet. You are a baby.
Can you? Yes, you are a baby. I'm sometimes still a baby. So, can you think of any examples of burials that you might know of?
And I must admit, I don't really know. Oh, I know that there's sort of a couple of ones. I can't remember specific examples, but I remember ones of from the Neolithic where there was one of a child who was buried on swan wings, I think.
Oh God, I love that. That's my favorite burial. That's the Fiddbeck burial, swan wing burial.
That one.
I have an embroidery of that. How sad is that? My friend did it. It was beautiful. It was the mother and child, my favorite burial.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. No doubt. Oh my God, I love dead people.
But what is interesting is that I know that when we were excavating somewhere and we found quite a lot of child burials, and they were all in this particular place, and the excavation leader said, oh, that must be where must have been where the church wall was then, because they would bury the children's burials closest to the wall so that they would be more protected from the roof. So also location of burial in relation to buildings and things could be.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. The example that I have is similar, but actually it's the Mesolithic burial.
Oh, okay.
In Skatholm. So essentially, the children are buried at there's this huge burial site. There's 2 different phases, and the earlier phases, the children are buried at like under the age of 5 skeletally. They're buried marginally, like at the borders of the 2 main burial sites, which they don't really know why. And then when the next phase happens, they're buried at the other side marginally. And they're often actually buried with dogs or near dogs and separated entirely from the adult burials. But
that's like protection or something.
Well, it's interesting because it must be significant and meaningful because, you know, people would be like, oh, well, if we looked at that modern sensibilities, we think, oh, well, they're nothing but dogs.
Right.
That's not how it seems. In fact, the children's burials and the dog burials are the richest burials in the whole estate.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. So that doesn't mean that children or even dogs were exceptional or alike in life, but that the burial shows certain requirements, special requirements, and then there's some sort of pattern between non-human and human children that have some sort of social identity and status in that burial practice. So
interesting.
When obviously we can't find the chosen ones skeletally because they're still alive.
Hopefully they're still alive, yes.
Yeah,
they'd be still alive. Can you imagine if we went through all of this and then it turns out?
We'll just get the zombies in.
True.
And then,
that'll be fine.
Zombie chosen one.
Yeah.
But that kind of shows you that how childhood is different in the Mesolithic. It's seen differently.
Right.
And that it might not even be like societally and social identity is all kind of wrapped on it. What's another way you could find children in the archaeological?
Well, I guess by like ways, I don't know. This is now me just going into my history with microanalysis and looking at traces of manufacture and things. And I remember that there were some beads that we looked at, and one of the hypotheses was that they had been made by children because they weren't quite as well finished and polished as the previous ones. So but I know that is a massive discussion of the whole like skill in archaeology and everything, and it's sort of almost the easy option to say, oh yeah, but kids must have made it then. But then it's like, well, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that, I know, in especially prehistory, and sort of children as kind of makers or making things or copying, I guess. So like learning in that respect.
Yeah, there's a great quote. I can't remember who said it, but I'll try and find it. I think it's in one of it'll be in the show notes. But there's a great quote that's basically like, if you give a prehistoric child a piece of pottery to make, they'll do it. A 4-year-old can do that. No 4-year-old can make a good lithic.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's fair. They don't quite have the motor skills to make the lithic, but they could try. And there's that, you're right. There is contention with it. There's definitely but it could be that there's a sort of an apprenticeship or a learning about that. And what's really interesting is sometimes you find, especially on pottery, you find very tiny fingerprints, which I really love. So when they're being fired, you find their little fingerprints, and you know that a child has at least touched it.
Yeah.
So it could be that they've either made it, or as it's firing, they've went and touched it.
That was in my other podcast, Too Break Time Travel. Shameless plug. In the very first episode, actually, talking with Sarah Lord from Potted History, we were talking about the Venus of Dolní Městonice, like the clay figurine, and that's got a fingerprint on its back, and it's a very small fingerprint. And one of the most popular theories is that it was given by a child to do. But she said that was probably rubbish. But anyway,
I just like the idea that they could be naughty and they're just like, I'm just going to touch this thing and I'm not allowed to touch.
Like, no, go away. Which, my goodness, if you've met my youngest, that's basically what she is. So
yeah. That's very cute. But there's also this idea of like craft and play, so we could do it at the same time, and that, you know, how play is actually just part of a scaffolding of successful production. So you can see that a lot in prehistoric childhood, flint knapping, because we've got chain apotoir. Is that how you say it?
Yes. laboratoire. Yeah.
There you go. You're better at French than I. So napping has that advantage over pottery because you can really reconstruct the sequences.
You can see all the different steps of the process and everything.
And you can rebuild that. So there's a really good example of the Lizard Man village in Sinagua in the region of Arizona that has this. They have these tiny little lithics that they've built it up, and they actually do think that one of the hypotheses is that it is actually children making them.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Yeah.
And so there's some cool stuff about that and how we view material culture as being created for and only for by adults rather than children making them for themselves. There's something like that too. So we could really see children as producers in their own right, which would tie into the Chosen One and how they could be an apprentice in some way.
So and they'll probably, because they're the Chosen One, they probably will have like wicked skill. So like we need to look out for like a child living in sort of located in a place where they're sort of lower down on the social scale and everything, but potentially creating things in a ridiculously and remarkably skillful way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of like, well, they are obviously in different stages of their childhood, but that means that they have, different corporeal, mental, social development, but they're also involved likely in different tasks and spaces and social spheres, not really just relating to adults, but, to children, to each other's children and back and forth as well. Yeah. So if they're in that kind of space, then that will be the first place we should look. Okay. And that also relates to lifeways. So, how people move differently throughout the landscape. So if he's I'm going to say they, because we don't know if he's a girl.
True. Not just a female Chosen One, yes.
They could move differently throughout the landscape, and they could go to certain areas or interact with certain monuments because they're moving around because they have a job. They have an apprenticeship or something like that. So you could look at stuff like that, even in the prehistory with it's represented in pregnant women. They think that the Dorset Circus Monument, pregnant women would have interacted with differently because they usually walk around it a lot. And so, I think we've got a lot to go through.
Geez. So archaeologically, we're looking for this kid as an active member of the society because even though they're a child, they are the Chosen One. They're maybe an apprentice or a maker. So we also just need to understand how they're perceived as a child in the kind of relevant fantastical society that they are a part of.
Yeah. About right. Sounds about right, yeah. No. So if we use the techniques that we would use as archaeologists in our, everyday life, everyday life, when I'm just
looking for children in the archaeological record.
When we're looking for these kids in burials every day, when we're looking at open profession, we could use that easily to find the missing the Chosen One and bring them back to the wizards.
Oh, I'm really getting sick of those wizards.
Me too. I think we should fire them instead of
maybe just ignore letters from them in the future.
Yeah, just forward them into the bin.
Yes, exactly.
Right, well, that's about it for this episode of And My Trial. We hope you enjoyed this weird quest to try to find a Chosen One. But if you have any suggestions for topics of future episodes, do get in contact via email or social media. All contact information as well as references and further reading for all the points that we've discussed today will be found in the show notes. Don't forget to check out other shows as well on the Archaeology Podcasting Network. If you'd like to support us or our fellow podcast hosts on the network, you can always become a member. It's very good. So all the information can be found at the archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Nice. By the way, what's that you're wearing, Ash?
This old thing. It's my latest magical amulet.
Are you sure it's safe to wear that?
Yeah, of course. It doesn't burn. I mean, it slightly burns. But what could possibly go wrong?
Okay, wait a minute. Let me just send a pigeon to a friend of mine who knows about these things. It's better to be safe than sorry.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.